This is the Real Change Wilmington Podcast, episode 51, Project Trust, with our guest today, Jim Boland.
You know, it's tough to correct human issues, and what works better is prevention. And so what we hope is that kids get off to a good foundation, that it prevents issues.
What is going on, everyone? This is your host of the Real Change Wilmington Podcast, Dustin Pierce, joined with my co-host, Tiara Harris. Real Change is a positive, constructive, and lighthearted source of local news events and resources. On our podcast, we interview leaders of local organizations to help squash rumors and foster a greater sense of pride in our community. Today, we have a really interesting episode with Jim Boland with Project Trust and all the cool things they're doing in our community. But before we get into that, Tiara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I feel refreshed for some reason. Maybe it's because we're surrounded by all the plants in our office right now. My current hyperfixation is baking. My Pinterest board is full of baking things. So if I randomly bring cakes into work, you know why.
What started that?
I don't know. Maybe my prefrontal cortex is developing and I just secretly want to become a housewife. I don't know. I don't know.
Oh my gosh. Wasn't expecting that answer. Wow. Okay.
What have you been up to?
I don't know how to come back from that. Yeah. So yesterday I was at the Murphy Theater. They did a commercial for America's 250th anniversary. Mm-hmm. Ohio is doing some big campaign, and part of that campaign is Ohio Goes to the Movies. And they're going to be showing this trailer that they filmed at the Murphy in movie theaters starting in 2025. And I was an extra in it. So we didn't know it, but Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, was the main actor, and it was kind of fun. So I'd say, hey, yeah, got to joke around a little bit, but he had his grandkids there, and I did have a line. DeWine was like, hey, Ohio, and everyone said, let's go to the movies. So that's my claim to fame now, and my IMDb profile.
When it pops up on the movie theaters, you're going to have to record it.
Yeah,
post it on
for sure. So yeah, what was your favorite part of talking to Jim?
I enjoyed learning about the history of Wilmington and how we were able to collectively better our community after the KKK rally. Mm-hmm. Before our conversation with him, I did not know that even happened.
When was that?
1990s.
Okay.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And it's weird that I didn't even know about that because my family was involved somewhat because of my grandpa. So after our initial meeting with him at Kava House, it sparked a conversation with my Nana, and I got to learn more. And it was just good to learn that our community came together and did something positive out of something so negative. Yeah,
so I guess the story is that the Klan came, they had a rally, and then after that, a lot of community members kind of brainstormed how we can better the community in different ways.
Yeah.
And one of those was Project Trust. One of them was Habitat for Humanity in Clinton County. So we interviewed them coming up here, and then the Harvest of Gold and other things.
It was like Hot Hoops, and there's just lots of more diversity meetings, I think, in general. So everyone just came together more. Yeah,
it was cool that a negative thing was made into a positive thing after that. I think my favorite part of talking to him was when we initially met at Kava House, just hearing some of his political views and also like how he was able to challenge those views and has like kind of step away from his political party per se, I guess. It really made me respect him as like a reasonable person. I think he's someone who really cares about kids and is very informed. And it sounds like Project Trust is a lot of good stuff for the community.
He's a very grounded person, but he's hilarious.
He is funny. So people are going to enjoy this podcast. So without further ado, let's bring in Jim. All right. Jimbo Boland. Do you go by Jimbo because your last name's Boland? Jimbo Boland?
Well, what's funny is I got called Jimbo, Jimmy, all kinds of things as a kid. But the Jimbo Gator comes from my students giving me a name every semester. I stumbled into this idea of having my students give me a name each semester. That's a great story, but it's just another story. And years ago, Bryce Martin, who's a famous Wilmingtonian, was in my graduate class, and he and his class gave me the name Jimbo Gator, and I liked it so much I kept it, so it's kind of stuck with me. The Jim Boland thing, it occurred to me a few years ago that, you know, I could be the king of Jimbo Land. And if you just put my whole name together, it's Jimbo Land. And much like Disneyland or other places, sometimes I introduce myself as the king of Jimbo Land, and it's a place where people are respected and listened to and treated well. Maybe as a result of this podcast, I'll start a theme park.
You should.
Jim Boland.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
So we did a pre-talk with you last week at Coffee House, and this is about a taste of what this podcast is going to be like. Just really thoughtful, digging into things.
Quite ridiculous.
Yeah. So
ridiculousness is good. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you have started and you run Project Trust, which we are going to get into. But before we get into that, we're going to ask about you, not just your name, but more about your life. So first of all, just tell us where you're from and what brought you to Wilmington.
Yeah. I was born in Cincinnati, grew up in Coleraine Township, sometimes known as Beavis, went to the University of Cincinnati, taught 3 years of fifth grade in the Harrison City Schools for Southwest Ohio. After 3 years of teaching fifth grade, I thought there's got to be a better way to do this education thing. And so I went back to grad school. And after completing a master's degree, I stayed and finished a doctorate in education. One of my doctoral professors called me one day and said, hey, they're looking for people at Wilmington College. And so came up and interviewed with Dr. John Bryant and started teaching here in 1985.
And you taught middle school philosophy?
You know, when you're in a small college, you tend to teach a lot of areas. And so I taught middle school philosophy, educational psychology, educational foundations, social studies methods, math methods, for a brief time, reading and language arts methods and science methods, and instructional technology, which is the course that we turned over to Bruce Saunders, who had much more expertise. So yeah, I taught quite a bit.
And you also helped coach track for 10 years, right?
Yeah, I was a distance runner in Cincinnati, and when I moved to Wilmington, I was looking for people to run with, and I knew the head coach, the head cross-country coach and track coach just a bit, and called him and asked if I could run with the team, and he asked me to be the assistant coach, and ultimately I took over the program and was the head cross-country coach for 10 years, the assistant track coach for most of that. I was the head track coach for 1 year and then the assistant track coach, working with the distance runners for 9 years, I guess.
So the next question is, are you married? And I know the answer is yes. And you have a very crazy story about how you met your wife. So let's hear about that.
It's a good story. So I was working at the Athlete's Foot while I was in college, and somebody there was having a party. I went to the party, and most of the people there were much younger than me. They were in high school. I was by myself. And I saw two young women come into the party, and so I approached them with my wonderful opening line, which was, I probably won't like either one of you, but since you're the only two girls here my age, I guess I have to talk to you. And that's probably close to word for word, even 45 something years later. And my future wife just kind of was finished with me at that point, and I talked to her roommate for a little while. Not much long after the conversation started, the roommate said something about going to a party in Loveland, and they left. I think about a month passed, and I was at a wedding at St. Peter and Chains Cathedral downtown, the cathedral in Cincinnati. And I saw a woman come out, and I thought she looked really familiar, but I didn't know who she was. And then later at the reception, I was standing behind her in line, just happened to be, and I saw her, and being the person I am, I struck up a conversation. I said, hey, you look really familiar to me, which she thought was a pickup line, but it's just me being me. And I said, you look familiar. So we ended up sitting and eating together, even though she was not impressed by my purple jacket. She told me later. She came from the east side of Cincinnati. I came from the west side of Cincinnati. Usually we don't talk to each other. So we had dinner and we ate together, and we tried to figure out where we knew each other from, because we were at the University of Cincinnati for 4 years together. But we went through all the classes. We were in different majors. We decided maybe we were in this one building a lot and we had just seen each other. And then she said, she might dispute this, but she's wrong. She's not usually wrong, but she's wrong about this. She said, well, just because we don't know each other doesn't mean we couldn't go out. And so she gave me her number, called her, we went out on a date. And then we went back to the apartment where she lived with the same roommate. And I used to use this in my educational psychology courses to talk about learning theory and memory and how memories are stored and how we bring them back into working memory. So we still didn't know each other, but we see her roommate, Kathy, and Kathy said something about being in Loveland and being with Sheila, and Kathy being there and saying Loveland. I went to the bathroom and all those things jarred my memory. And I was in the bathroom and I yelled, I know who you are. I know who you are. And I can't say what my wife said. She said, yeah, you're the blankety blank. We met at the party. But by that time I had charmed her with a wonderful date of Miller beer and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and
Classy.
the rest is history. Yeah, classy, very much. Then we dated for, I don't know, that was sometime in October, I believe, the wedding reception. And then pretty quickly we talked about getting married. I was teaching still. And so I talk about a lot of things and she makes plans based on things I say. She begins planning and I'm just talking about all kinds of things. And then I realized that if I get into the Boston Marathon, I could propose to her with my shirt. Sheila, will you marry me? But I need then to say to her, I'm not so sure about getting married, which I'm just saying because, I need to be able to propose with the shirt. And from her perspective, and I don't know this till later, she's like not very happy with me because she thinks I'm calling it off. So in the meantime, the qualifying marathon that I'm going to run gets canceled due to a big snowstorm. And it's the last day you can qualify for Boston. They rerun the marathon the following week, even though they said they weren't going to. And they call some people to tell them, and they announce it on the radio, but I never get the message. I have no idea it's being rerun the next week. So I talked to the race director, Bob Ronker, great guy, state mile champion. He used to work for Runner's World, and he knew the race director at Boston. And he said, I'll get you in. So he got me into the race, even though I hadn't run the qualifying time. And so there I proposed with my shirt, which said, Sheila, will you marry me? With her name misspelled on the shirt because my teaching aide at the time didn't spell it correctly and gave me back an extra H and said, you gave me an extra H. But she said yes, even though you can imagine what I looked like at 25 Mile Point, a hot day in Boston. So
Sweaty. And then do you have kids?
3 children, 3 boys. Connor's our oldest. He was born in Cincinnati. Pretty quickly, we moved to Mason when I took the teaching job at Wilmington. And then at 86, we moved to Wilmington, bought a house in Wilmington across the street from the college. So Connor was our baby when we came. Sean came along in 1988 and Adrian in 1990. And Adrian passed away in 2021.
So what are some of your hobbies? What do you do for fun?
I'm recovering from some surgery, so I've had to take hiatus from bowling and golf. Those are my 2 primary hobbies that I enjoy participating in when I'm doing well. When I'm not doing well, I enjoy them less. I walk a bit. I read a lot.
You ever done duck pin bowling?
I have not done duck pin bowling.
But you know what it is?
Is it 9? Do they use 9 pins? I think
it's the regular amount, but they're just really small.
Oh,
And they're on strings usually, so like when they fall down, they get pulled back up.
Oh, yeah.
There's a place in Columbus that does it, and I think there's some places around, Dayton maybe.
I've never heard of that before.
Duck pin bowling. It's a good time.
Yeah.
Definitely recommend it.
Bowling was initially 9 pins in the New England states when it first started. And there was so much gambling and so much drinking that women's groups were opposed to it. And they started writing legislation where they outlawed the game of 9 pins. And so they just switched to 10 pins and were able to keep it going.
Lesson to all you women out there. Don't try to take away our fun.
I didn't say that.
I'm just kidding.
I'm just stating facts.
Okay.
You're stating opinions.
I'm just joking around. All right. So last question in the About You section is just what's a defining moment of your life that has made you who you are or helped shape your personality and values a little bit?
It's such a tough choice. There's so many. I'm going to run through a number that are essential, and then I'm going to maybe focus on just one. So certainly meeting my wife, getting married, having my 3 sons, having my 2 grandchildren, Grayson and Ella, And then the loss of Adrian, our youngest son, absolutely changes you profoundly. Those are all key. Being one of 7 children is foundational, and we're in touch every day on a text thread. So all those things are really important. 2 things really profoundly changed me. One was turning an ankle playing basketball and having it casted, and then starting to run to get back in shape. Running in some races, being disappointed in how bad I was, and really making a commitment to training and running a lot.
This was in high school or
college? It was in college.
You were 20, I think.
Yeah, I may have said that. I know I was working at Brendan Moore's Sporting Goods. I was selling running shoes, and I was meeting these amazing older people who were runners who would come into the store. And they were just different than a lot of customers. They were just vibrant. There was this couple, Ernestine and Hugh Yeomans. They were like in their 70s, and they competed in Special Olympics, and they were just so positive and vibrant, and they were runners. And I was meeting all of these people who were very positive, who were runners. And then I turned my ankle and I ran in a race, and the race was really cool. And then as I started running more, I just had some natural characteristics that allowed me to be successful as a distance runner. Narrow hips, long legs in proportion to my height, VO2 max, just some characteristics of my body that allowed me to run a little bit, train a little bit, and do pretty well. And so I received some recognition from all kinds of folks, doctors and surgeons and professors, and that became my social circle. And, we ran races just about every weekend, and just gave me a lot of confidence. And just running in the morning before teaching was very, very positive for me, very empowering. It developed my self-concept quite a bit. And it led me to coaching. And so I coached for 10 years at Wilmington College. And those relationships are essential, positive relationships that continue to this day. And then involvement with Project Trust. If somebody would have told me at 20 that I would be comfortable getting up in a room in front of people and singing, I would have told them they were crazy. But Project Trust has just led to this comfort with people, this enjoyment with people, this kind of need to bring people together, to help them resolve differences peacefully, to be respectful of each other. So Project Trust has been very important. And, to respect all people and to not get locked into your silos, you got to come back to that over and over and over again. Otherwise, you just get complacent and cobwebs grow in your brain and you just get stuck and stale. But by going to Project Trust over and over again and working with groups of people, it's a constant reminder to understand that all people should be treated with respect.
That's awesome. So I think that's a good transition into Project Trust itself. So tell us about how it got started.
The Wilmington College Education Department was invited by the Northeast Regional Center for Drug-Free Schools and Communities, which was a grant given out by the U.S. Department of Education. They invited us to partner with a local school to come to training in New York. And so we partnered with what was then known as the Roger Bohr Junior High School. And I had been talking with the assistant principal, Steve Knox. He had asked me to come in and talk to a small group of students around race issues where there were some trouble in the schools between groups. And so we invited them and they formed a team. The department formed a team. We went off to New York and they trained us. Their philosophy was, we don't know what problems you have in your community and we don't know how to solve them. Some people would say, well, that sounds like the government. But their answer was, we think you can identify your issues and we think you can solve your problems. If you know how to talk to each other, if you know how to action plan, you know how to dispute resolution, you can identify and you can solve your problems. And we created a number of programs, but the program that has stayed around the longest is Project Trust. And the trust stands for Teaching Respect, Understanding, Student Teamwork. And that was created The original introduction and the original training was in 1990. And then we had a follow-up training in 1992 where we created Project Trust. And the first camp was in the fall of 1992.
So what is the overall mission of Project Trust?
Essentially, it's to break down the barriers between the different clique groups that form in middle school communities. If you talk to people about their lives and ask them to go back and think about their middle school days, their junior high school days, that's when they identify that they were bullied or made to feel belittled. People say, I would never go back to that age. And I think it's an age where children in the middle years begin to start separating from their parents and forming their own identities, and their bodies are changing. They can look strange and different and weird. I always joke with them about how, we don't usually grow symmetrically. It's like first your ears grow, and so you get these giant adult ears, but the rest of your body's not caught up, or you get really tall, but you're very skinny, or your hair's too long, it's too short, your nose is too big or it's too small. And kids in the middle, I don't think they're always necessarily being mean, but they just see those differences and they comment on them. And it's a time where kids are questioning, trying to figure out where they fit in the world. And often bullying is something that takes place. So Mr. Knox at the time told me that in the fall of the school year, I don't know, I think it was October, he had 1,500 referrals for behavior issues, because assistant principals typically deal with the behavior issues. And when he sat down and talked with the kids, the primary concern was they just were from different groups who didn't like each other because they didn't know each other. And he thought if we could just help these kids get to know each other, we would minimize a lot of those issues. And I think he's right. I think it happened. And there's a lesson for the wider world today. If we could just have people sit down and in a process where everybody follows some rules, where you have to listen, each person has an opportunity to have their voice heard, and then the next person gets to, we could probably resolve lots of issues that we have. But anyway, that's the central mission.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but one of the things we ask is, what's your favorite quote? And I think you said last time that community is not produced, it is provoked and awakened. And I feel like that's kind of like plays into the whole mission. And
it's John O'Donohue who said that in a book called Beauty. And I was reading it. I read that sentence in there, and I'm always looking for comments about community. And I need to correct that. So it's community is not produced. It is invoked and awakened. So not provoked, but invoked and awakened. And that's my favorite Project Trust quote.
The quote is essentially trying to say that, like, we're not trying to force community to happen. Like, community is like innate in all of us, and you're bringing it out.
I think so.
People. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly right. I joke with parents all the time who compliment us on Project Trust. And I'll say, well, yeah, we created friendliness and community building. I mean, we didn't create any of these things. What we do is we think we do a good job of removing the barriers that keep people from living in community. Living in community is a pretty natural thing.
Humans are like relational beings, I suppose.
I think so, yeah. And the other quote is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And really, there's some similarity to the other quote in that you can't force your way into good teaching. If you can create the right conditions, then learning is very natural. We're learning. We're all learning right now. You create the right conditions and just get out of the way. Students have natural curiosity to learn about the world. And so if you can create those conditions, then it's very easy to teach. If you don't create those conditions, it can be very difficult to teach.
Tira nodding her head. She's a teacher somewhat, right?
It is very difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
You can't force someone to get better. So just creating an atmosphere where the child feels that they have comfort and that they can express their frustrations is really key. I understand.
I agree, sure.
How has the program evolved since its inception?
It's grown. So initially it was just in the Wilmington schools starting in 92, and then we didn't have another retreat until 96. So Wilmington College was very instrumental in allowing us to use their facilities to have events from 92 to 96, but we didn't have the funds for a retreat. So Wilmington started full bore. Wilmington city schools, 96, having 2 retreats a year. And we've pretty much done that ever since. There's a couple of hiccups here and there. In 2001, Mike Adams, who was a student of mine at Wilmington College, began teaching at Clinton Massey and had a retreat there. And so we got together with Mike and said, look, let's make sure we stay connected and communicate about what we're doing. And so we created a board at that time. And then when I became the director of the Peace Center, I had time to write grants, and we expanded again and brought another number of schools on board. So we've expanded it. We also expanded in a way where we could work with 5th grade students doing one-day events. And so we work with every 5th grader in the Kings district, and we've done that for about 10 years. And we've visited schools also for 4-hour visits. So it's expanded in that we also reach that younger group. We also just finished a 3-year grant with the Blanchester schools, working with students who had just finished K through 3, giving them some Project Trust experiences in addition to some additional academic work over the summer. And that was COVID money from the federal government. The other thing that's happened is there are just these crazy camp traditions that have evolved that have nothing to do with our curriculum. And in some ways, some of those things are the things that people remember the most, like singing. We never had any plan to make anybody sing, but there are these camp traditions that kids come in with and counselors come in with, and they start singing songs or doing these crazy things, and everybody joins in. So that's kind of developed a life of its own. And also, we had a block of time on the second day in the afternoon after lunch where we knew we wanted to deal with cultural differences, but we struggled with finding the right curriculum. And ultimately, we settled on looking at bullying. And almost everything else is a very positive, bringing kids together kind of experience. But that 90 minutes is where we're looking at a topic and fighting it as opposed to just bringing people together.
How would you define bullying? I think you had a good explanation when we met last week.
Yeah, people tend to misidentify it at times and lack understanding. The legal definition is that it's a repeated behavior. There's a power differential, and it's meant to intimidate or belittle. So if you tell me my nose is too big, which might be true, that's not bullying. It's not a kind thing. I can't believe you would say that.
How dare you, Tira?
Yeah, come on.
Come on.
I walked like 15 minutes to get here and you insult me. That would be mean. It would be a mean thing, but it wouldn't be bullying. But if you were taller than me, and we've already talked about this, you might be, or if you had more power than me, and you have some power in a podcast, I guess, if you had more power and you said it in a way that you meant to belittle me, and then every time I see you, you say the same thing, that rises to the level of bullying. It's a horrible thing. When there's a power differential, you're made to feel weak, and it happens over and over and over again. You know, the kids who put up with that and go to school day in and day out, that's a lot of grit. And the kids who can make it through that end up being very strong. It's difficult. They really need adult help when they're truly being bullied. Unfortunately, sometimes adults and teachers and uncles and grandparents will say, well, you got to go stand up for yourself. And I saw the story the other day. It was a comedian, a little comedian.
Kevin Hart.
It might have been Rob Schneider.
Speaking of bullying again, Tira.
That was based on description.
Yeah.
But
he punched a guy in the nose and he never got bullied again. And those are the stories everybody likes to hear. And if that works, fine. But usually if you're smaller and you have less power and you punch somebody in the nose, then it gets worse. I'm all for standing up for yourself. I'm all for 20-year-olds standing up for themselves. But when you're a little kid and you're truly being bullied, you need adult help. And kids hide it well. One of the reasons it happens is bullies hide it very well. And sometimes kids who are being bullied, they would rather have people to hang out with than to be isolated or loners. And they will hang out with the bullies. And so it can send confusing messages to the adults who are in charge of them. They think they're friends, and the kids hide it well, but They're still being bullied and they need adult help and they have to step in. And teachers and schools need to have plans for looking at bullying, looking at where it happens in schools and doing what they can to limit it as much as possible.
How does an adult help bullying without making the kid that's being bullied feel unempowered or like a victim? You know, so how do you empower someone who's being bullied? I would assume if you just like step in and take care of it, that kid's going to feel like they're constantly needing someone else to help them. And
yeah, it's a good question. And I don't know that I have a great answer other than, at least initially, you need to stop that daily bullying. And I think that's the first step. And then maybe later you have to address the feeling of being helped out and maybe feeling, disempowered. But I think we're so focused on the bullying aspect that we don't pay as much attention to that. And I think maybe rightfully so. You got to get them out of that situation first.
I guess it could feel empowering to know that adults will help you out if you bring it to their attention. Like you have the power to like get help.
Right.
So.
And a lot of kids don't. A lot of kids don't go. And that hurts. When we talk about education, everything should be age appropriate. Maybe every first grader who plays soccer should get an award or a ribbon. You hear a lot of people critical of that. Maybe not 16-year-olds, definitely not 20-year-olds, but what's age appropriate? If a kid's being bullied every day, first graders don't have the capacity to understand what's happening and know how to deal with it. They depend on adults. And so, there's a continuum of how we deal with children and how much responsibility we give them. And the younger they are, the more the adults have responsibility.
And you spoke about adult bullying when we met last week as well. You said that it's rewarded and successful. Do you host any adult retreats or courses?
Would love to. Would love to work with workforces and with employees. I did do a talk once with human resources professionals in Clinton County. It's been quite some time. I haven't pursued that kind of work, but yeah, I think it happens. I think adults loathe to step in when bullying is happening. People would rather identify with the bully and protect themselves than to challenge the bully. I think at almost any age and any level, it takes some courage. I don't know that I have a great amount of courage when I'm in those settings.
Is that called the bystander effect?
I'm not sure. I've heard of the bystander effect, and maybe I should know it. Makes sense, but that's research for everybody out in podcast land.
Yeah, go ahead and do that fact check.
I think it's the definition of a bystander. If it's not the bystander effect, just being a bystander, like not taking action.
For the millions out there,
the millions.
Make sure you get back to Real Change Wilmington and let them know about the bystander effect. And sometimes in bully training, the bystanders are encouraged to step in. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes maybe not so good.
I feel like there's an aspect of bullying where it's not like abuse, it's not like aggression, it's not like things that you could see, it's not hitting, it's not yelling, but it's more like neglect. And that's like the most like seemingly toxic form of bullying, because like, what are you going to say to someone who's like just not doing anything? Because if you start acting out, then you're the crazy one, you're the angry one, but you're just like defending for your basic rights or decency,
Yeah, I mean, I think neglect is, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but I think neglect might be more harmful and more painful emotionally than bullying. In that, for sure, kids will sometimes choose to hang out with the bullies and call them friends just to meet their need for belonging. So certainly a number of psychiatrists will talk about, that need for belonging. So if you're neglected and you're a loner, you're an isolate, nobody hangs out with you, but you purposely hang out with the bullies, it would suggest that that's less painful. Bullying is less painful than being neglected, right? I mean,
yeah.
That's pretty bad. Yeah.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, and those are the kids. I've certainly seen some research that says that you got to have one friend. You don't have to have 10 friends or, parents think about, they feel bad for their child because they don't have any friends. I talked to some parents recently about their son who's a young adult who doesn't have any friends, and it's distressing and concerning. And so parents often, they want their kids to have a lot of friends. And what the research seems to suggest is that you need to have at least one friend, somebody to hang out with, because otherwise you're just sitting watching the world go by. Something's wrong.
Did you have a comment?
Just lots of self-reflection, that's all.
Do you need a friend?
Yeah, I'll have to call you after that.
We'll be friends. We can go for walks.
All right, so the next question is just kind of give us like a breakdown of what the Project Trust retreats look like. Like, what do you do in that time?
Project Trust is a true collaboration. You could have this conversation with any of our school coordinators or any of our teachers who'd come to the retreats, or our high school students who serve as counselors. So ideally, our school coordinators reach out to the staff and say, identify the opinion leaders from the different clique groups. We can't bring every child to camp, so the idea is that the way you change a culture is you get to the people within groups who are influential. So we invite those opinion leaders, we ask the teachers to identify them, and they're invited to camp. We can't make them come to camp, so we don't always get every child we want or the right mix, but that's the process. So we invite them to camp. They're placed into family groups based on their differences. Don't know if these are the current terms. I need to have a meeting with the kids to find out. A skater and a farm kid and a African-American kid and
a goth kid.
A goth kid, if they still exist.
Tiara's African-American and goth.
2 in 1.
Did you have some goth stuff going on?
She always wears black.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And long sleeves.
I do.
It's going to be 100 degrees outside. I just wear long sleeves.
I don't think anyone has seen me with short sleeves for years.
I need to break down the barriers here, I think, because we have two different groups. And what was your clique group?
My clique group? The football degenerates. So, like, not the cool kids actually had playing time, but, like, the nerds who sat on the bench.
All right. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
I got cut all 4 years when I tried out for basketball.
I played sports a lot as well, but I was injured so much that I basically felt like a coach on the sidelines.
Degenerate athletes. I like it. It's a new term. I collect these terms.
That's not a term that I typically say. I'm just spitting things out of my mouth.
Well, that's official now.
That's official.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
that's a group, and someone will be filling that.
Okay, yeah. Find the degenerate athletes.
It'll be in our survey. So anyway, we form family groups based on their differences. And when they come to camp, almost everything they do in the clique groups or in their family groups. The kids will say, "You're trying to break us up from our friends." We'll say, "No, we're trying to just expose you to other people so you can find out more about people who are different from you."
Wait, so the family groups are only the people in the clique, or they're one of everybody?
No, one from each.
Okay, got it. So I'm confused.
Yeah, so it's a blending of the different clique groups. And it's fascinating because often 24 hours later, in one of the sessions that we have where kids are just sitting around answering open-ended questions, they volunteer information about themselves that they tell us they've never told anybody in their life. And who is it? Kids that were put together based on their differences that they met 24 hours later. But that speaks to removing the barriers within the clique groups because they feel comfortable sharing this information about themselves. So anyway, teachers invite, kids go to school that day, and then they come back after school and meet and then head down to Camp Kern, which we've used almost exclusively for our retreats. And the first evening is devoted to ice breaking and community building, team building, and contracting, which is really important, where they're given a voice to help us shape what we're going to do, how we're going to be together. And again, some ideas that came originally from the Northeast Regional Center grant was, when you work with a group of students or people, you ask them, what do you need from us so that you can make this an enjoyable experience? And what are some of your interests so we can do some things that focus on your interest? And you sprinkle that in the best you can and hope that it helps the overall experience. So that's the first night is contracting, team building, icebreakers. The second day, half the group is involved in a plane crash survivor exercise. And the other half is with the Camp Kern staff doing low ropes, challenge, coursework where they work together. A lot of fun. In the afternoon, they flip-flop. And so the afternoon, the other half is doing the plane crash and the other half is doing the low ropes. We've talked about the bullying. So there's an hour and a half session I lead on bullying. And again, it's very dynamic and interactive. And then in the evening is that session that I was referring to a moment ago where they're together about 90 minutes and they are just asking each other open-ended questions. And they tend to be very powerful sessions where kids open up about who they are. And it's funny because they're just the list of questions. What was your favorite toy as a child and why? If you could relive a day in your life, what would it be? If you won $1 million, how would you spend it? It tends to be very powerful. I've never done that activity with any group of people where it didn't turn out to be just crazy powerful. We just don't do those things. And college students just love it.
Sometimes kids will reveal like really dark things like abuse or things like that. How do you respond to that? How do the kids respond to that?
That's a good question. Sometimes there needs to be follow-up. We did have a child talk about being repeatedly raped by her stepfather. And it was very interesting the way that unfolded because 99% of the time there's an adult in the room. But in this case, the adult had some family thing they had to leave for. And when that was shared, it was the middle school students and the high school counselors. And I didn't talk last week, I don't think, about the high school counselors. I need to make sure I follow up on that. They are a huge part of the success of Project Trust. But it turned out there were only 2 high school counselors there. Unknown to me, these are 2 high school boys who didn't see eye to eye. They weren't buddies. They had this little conflict when they were younger. We didn't know that. So this girl shares it. It could be that she shared it because there were no adults in the room. That's one of the primary benefits of having peer mediation programs in schools because kids will talk. If adults aren't present, they're more likely to talk. We don't know if that's why she shared that, but she shared it. And these guys handled it really well. They came to their teachers and said, hey, look, we know this is confidential, but we thought we'd better share it with you. And so the teachers went back to the counselors at school and they found out that the court case had been adjudicated. The daughter had eventually told her mother and the stepfather was brought to trial. But yeah, anything that involves violence or abuse needs to be brought to the attention of adults so that the appropriate actions can be taken. So in this case, these 2 kids, they told the teachers followed up. And then the boys built this really great relationship, bonding over that experience that they had as counselors. And they kind of shared that with us later. So it turned out to be, I think, a positive experience. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I assume a positive experience for the girl to at least get that off her chest. And the kids do a pretty remarkable job in the contract. And we talk about confidentiality and keeping these things close and not just, leaving camp and talking about people. I've never gotten any feedback that has been an issue. I can imagine it happens sometimes, but I've never gotten that feedback. I hope that answers.
Yeah. I think I cut you off. You were talking about the weekend, I think, about how things happen, and you were discussing the small groups. What's the next thing, I guess?
Yeah, so that's the boundary breaking activity. And then the night ends with a square dance with a great caller who just does a great job of blending and mixing kids. So you think of the traditional middle school dance where everybody stands on one side and looks at each other. This doesn't happen. First, he starts with like some line dance. And then boys are on one side of the room, girls on the other side of the room, and they start to walk up and they hold hands. He teaches them how to hold hands, how to do it gently. They start to circle around the room and they switch partners. And it's all about just blending the kids together. And it's a great activity. There's always a few kids who don't want to do it, but our mantra is always challenge by choice. And we just encourage and encourage and encourage. And the kids love it. When I ask, the next day, they love it. So the evening often closes with the square dance, and then there might be snacks afterwards. Kids are always hungry. So sometimes there's hot dogs after the dance or pizza after the dance and snacks, an insane amount of snacks that kids bring or the teachers bring. And then the next day, the morning is devoted to the Adventure Challenge, which is kind of like the Great Race from television. Not that I've ever seen it, but I think it's like that. Groups of people have these challenges and they earn points. So the 6 family groups are traipsing around Camp Kern. They come to one challenge and it's a heavy stranded rope that has been frozen overnight. And so it's in a block and they have to untie the knot. It's a knot in a block of ice. If they get that untied, they get points. And there's a pole hug where there's just these poles out in the woods. And if somebody in their group can hold on to the pole for over whatever it is, 2 minutes, they get points. I'm always at Pete's Tower, which is 40 feet up. And they are challenged to drop marshmallows from the top and catch marshmallows on the ground in their mouth. They get points for that.
Without choking and dying.
We prefer it that way.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Total Drama Island? It's a TV show.
No.
That's what it reminds me of.
Total Drama Island.
Have you seen it?
That was like after my time, but it's just funny that came out of your mouth.
Well, because it reminds me.
Yeah.
And they even have marshmallows.
There was like the Chubby Bunny challenge where you shove marshmallows in your mouth. I thought someone died doing that.
We've done Chubby Bunny. We haven't done it in a long time. I don't know why. It's just...
people were dying, that's why.
It could be.
Someone says it's not a good idea anymore.
Yeah. We've been doing this so long that there are teachers who were at camp as 7th graders and 8th graders. That's when you know there's these demarcation stages. We start realizing how old you are when you're talking to a teacher and you say, I don't know if I've met you. And they say, well, yeah, I came to camp when I was in 7th grade. Oh, and then, then you meet the children of those teachers and it just goes on and on. The other thing is that some of these young teachers are in important administrative positions, in the region. And they are also people who would always bring a can of Cheese Whiz and they would just fill their mouths with Cheese Whiz until it was coming out. They would do that every camp. I will keep it confidential who that person is, but they're hungry and, cheese is good for you.
How does Project Trust measure the success and effectiveness of the program within the school and the community?
There's 3 things we've done over the years. Sometimes I like to just say it's self-evident. You have the experience, you're watching people laugh, you're watching people come in who are frightened to death and, within a half hour they're laughing and high-fiving and having a good time. But that doesn't always work for people, especially for granting agencies and foundations. You have to prove that what you're doing, makes some sense. And often it's difficult to do that. I didn't talk about it last week. So there's a self-concept identifier that we did for quite some time. But then we started looking for something that would allow us to see how comfortable click group members were with other click group members. I didn't do an exhaustive search, but did a pretty good search looking for something, some kind of survey, and we couldn't find anything. We found something in Japanese schools that didn't translate very well. And then probably, I'm guessing that a colleague in the sociology department, Mary Ellen Baddock, mentioned the Bogardus social distance inventory. Did you have Mary Ellen? You're smiling.
I may have.
Mary Ellen told us about the Bogardus social distance inventory, which was used by sociologists to gauge how ethnic groups got along in cosmopolitan urban areas. So how did the Italians feel about the Germans, or how did the Irish get along with blacks? How did Hispanics get along with Jews? Whatever the case may be. So we looked at that and thought, well, we could adapt it. And we changed the ethnic groups to clique groups. And we sat down with the middle schoolers and said, what are the clique groups? And they gave us a list. Cheerleaders, athletes, and the dirties, and the skaters and whatever, there was a whole list. And then we changed the social distance scale from 0 was probably marry into the group, 7 being kick them out of our country. We changed that. We had the kids help us identify the scale. And they said, invite over for sleepover or kick them out of our school. And so we adapted that, started using it. We got the results that we hoped we would get. They were statistically significant. We had a control group. We did work with Mary Ellen and another sociologist that we worked with, and we did research and published it in a middle school journal. And then later, talking with a director from Camp Kern, I was expressing my frustration with trying to convince foundations to give us money for doing this prevention work. Most human problems are better addressed through prevention than they are through correction. I mean, even AA, I think, has like a 10 to 12% success rate. Be much better off if people who ultimately were alcoholic just didn't start drinking. And, it's tough to correct human issues. And what works better is prevention. And so what we hope is that if kids get off to a good foundation, that it prevents issues. But if you go to donors and you say, we're going to take this group of kids who are okay, and we're going to give them this program that'll help them get to know each other. And then we hope when they get out, they'll be okay. There's nothing sexy about that. There's nothing exciting about that. Foundations want to hear that you're going to take this group of people who are screwed up, you're going to do this treatment, and then they're going to be wonderful. Those programs don't exist. They just don't. They don't. But Jeff Marriage, former director at Camp Kern, said to me, you need to look into the 40 developmental assets, because what the assets say is that when kids have more assets, they're more likely to do well. They're more likely to be involved in pro-social activities and less likely to be involved in negative social activities. And if you can tie what you do in your program to these positive assets, then you can show that chances are your kids are going to be more likely to be engaged in positive activities, less likely to be involved in premarital sex, less likely to be involved in damaging the community, or much more likely to be involved in positive success. So we looked at the list of 40 assets and identified 23 assets that we think our program provides, some more obvious than others. And it's a beautiful way to go to the community and say, assets are good for kids. We develop these assets. Please support our program. And I've used that in speaking with groups. And I had a banker come up and say, that is one of the best things I've ever heard. Their bank gave us money for about 5 years. So
He said it was the best thing he's ever heard because of why?
Just connecting the prevention activity to the hundreds of thousands of kids. The developmental assets have been really spread throughout the country. And so hundreds of thousands of kids have been surveyed. And then you can look at those kids and their histories and tell that when you have assets, you do well. An asset is when a kid has 2 or 3 non-parent adults who care about them. That's a positive asset. Spending time in church is a positive asset. Not having nothing to do and hanging out with friends for hours and hours on end is not a positive asset. I'm sure there's a website for the developmental assets.
Yeah, I never heard of it until you brought it up. You said it was made by the Lutheran Church or something?
Yeah, it came out of the Lutheran Church.
We talked a lot about how successful the program is. Are there any notable stories of people who went through the program?
I don't know all of them, for sure. That's one of the wonderful things I often think about is that right now there might be a former high school counselor in their 30s talking to a 20-year-old who was in their family group, and they're at Walmart right now, and they run into each other, and they built this connection from their family group 10 years ago at camp. And so there are a lot of stories out there I know nothing about. One of my favorites is a young woman who was at one of our events and was not happy. We were having a Halloween dance. It was a Project Trust Halloween dance, and she interpreted that as dance and didn't think that we were going to do some Project Trust activities to help these kids learn to get along. And she didn't like it, and she didn't want to participate. And she was at a table, this was in the early days, between 92 and 96, we were at Wilmington College, in the dining hall, and she was just not going to participate. But what was important about her was she was at a round table, and there were about 20 kids just like hanging on to her. every word, and they weren't going to participate if she didn't participate. And afterwards, I said to the assistant principal, we were trying to figure out what happened because all of our events were just positive, happy, kids got along, and this was just not good. And I said, I don't know what happened, but I know we got to invite that kid to camp because she's the definition of an opinion leader. And Mr. Knox said, man, you're right. He just shook his head like, we don't want to bring that kid. So that must have been close to 96 because she came to the camp, probably the next camp. She wasn't very involved, and we see this a lot. Wasn't very involved in the beginning. We'd have community meetings, and she'd have her head down on the floor, acting like she was sleeping. But eventually, it just kind of kicked in, and she went to the teacher coordinator at the time, who was Missy Brewer at Wilmington Middle School, and said, that was a really good thing. I want that in my life. I want my life to include this. And that was the beginning of her life transitioning into just a very different life. She ended up in youth leadership. She joined one of the services. I think she was a Marine. She's very close to my oldest son's age. She sent him a message, my son, and asked Connor to pass this along to me. Christina said, tell your father I said happy birthday. Also tell him thank you from me. I'm grateful for how he intervened in my life and impacted my trajectory. Tell him I never forget his grace and I appreciate him. That means everything to me. And those stories are just out there. It doesn't happen to every kid, but there's almost always a couple of kids who have these amazing experiences at camp. And the other kids have good experiences. Some kids just, they got a chance to get dirty and eat worms or hold a girl's hand, but there's almost always somebody who has kind of a life-changing experience. I've got another story about another kid. It's another story that almost brings me to tears. So it was a Wilmington camp. I sat down for one of the meals, and there was a bigger boy, a heavy-set boy. I think it was him who I'd seen the prior week in the principal's office, like had to meet the principal for something he had done. And I was in the schools because of my position as a professor. I was in the schools a lot, seeing my students and observing the teaching. And so I would sometimes see kids. So I saw this kid and I thought, I'll sit next to him at lunch and just, see what he's about. And it's a very engaging conversation. I'm happy we talked about singing because somebody started this chant to get one of the teachers to stand up and sing a song. I'm sitting next to this kid, and he says, man, I would never sing a song. I would never want to sing a song. And I thought, yeah, I know. I think it might have been early enough that I still was in that position where I didn't want to sing a song. I sat with him again at the next meal, and somebody had to sing a song. Then he said something like, if they made me sing a song, I think I know what I would sing. And I thought, well, that's different. And, he's been going through the activities between the meals. And then at the next meal, he said something that made me think, I think this kid wants to sing. And everything about him at the time suggested that it was a bad idea to get this kid to sing a song. But I'm sitting next to him at the next meal, and I start to chant to get this kid to sing a song. And I glance over at the teachers, and they're looking at me like I am making the biggest mistake of my life. This kid stands up, and he's like a little Jackie Gleason, which is a very dated reference. But Jackie Gleason was this amazing comedian, a big, big man, had his own show, The Honeymooners. The older audience will know who he was. And the guy was really light on his feet and could dance. He was a big guy. And this guy got up and he sang Splish Splash, I Was Taking a Bath, and he's dancing. And he's just smiling, and the teachers are smiling. It was just this moment. This just special moment where it worked. For the longest time, when I bowled, I would have this piece of paper on my wristband that would say Splish Splash on it. And it was because when I would release the bowling ball, I wanted to feel the joy that I felt in the moment when he was singing that song and looking at the teachers. From an athletic perspective, I wanted to feel the feeling of joy as I released a basketball or released a bowling ball or swung a golf club. So I would always have Splish Splash just written on there. It eventually got replaced by my grandson saying Sean, saying his uncle's name. But for the longest time, I had Splish Splash. And one day, many, many, many years later, I was in a Staples in Wilmington, and I was waiting in line, and there was another cashier who said, "Hey, I'm open over here." And I walked over, and I'm talking to the guy, and I said, "How you doing? How you doing?" And almost at the same time, I realized it was Splish Splash. I don't remember his first name. Sometimes it comes to me. And he was working as a cashier there, and he knew who I was. And we talked about that, and I told him about, it was later that I started doing the Splish Splash on my wristband. So I told him I said, "I think about you a lot," because I told him the story. I said, "Well, how was your experience?" And he said, "Well, it's the best thing I've ever done in my life." Very touching. I walked out, ran into my friend Carl Zakowski. His chiropractic business had been a financial supporter of Project Trust. His son had been a great counselor for us. It was hard to tell him the story, but I shared the story with him because it was just very important to me. So again, there are just stories out there.
Is there a religious or a spiritual aspect of Project Trust? Or because it sounds like people are very devoted to this, and this is typically a thing that the church or a group would take on, but it doesn't sound like any of that is part of this.
I'm very aware of the law when it comes to the separation of church and state. I'm a supporter of separation of church and state. I went to Catholic grade school. I went to Catholic high school. So my experience was different than public school. You can talk about religion. You can share your faith in schools. You can talk, as far as I know, it's in the curriculum, the fourth grade Ohio curriculum, to share about the major world religions so kids know what the world religions are. What you can't do is you can't mandate religion in public schools. You can't force kids to follow religious activities. So I often say to religious friends or Catholic friends, it's close as you can get to having religious experience without mandating. It's not mandated and not talking directly about religion, but certainly those core principles that all people have value. When I do my activity, I talk about how, my personal belief is that all people are children of God, that they're born with something to offer to the world. They have a gift to offer, and to disrespect other people who are also gifted from God seems to me to be a dangerous thing. There are certainly teachers who come to camp who are devoted to the program and love it, who aren't religious, don't go to church, might even be atheist, but love the fact that we're teaching these values.
So it doesn't just bring cliques of children together, it brings cliques of adults.
I think so. It's just good to get to know other people and find out who they are separate from the image that they might have.
Yeah. I think my question was just more like, what is the motivating factor behind all this? And it just sounds like it's a respect for people's lives and wanting to show kids that they're valuable.
Then the kids come back to school, and it does influence the culture. And I didn't say that today, but the idea is that the opinion leaders, if we can get to the opinion leaders, then what we hope is they go back and they're influential within their school groups, and they begin to stand up for treating all people with respect, like I'm guessing Christina did, when she got back to school, when she decided that she wanted to be a person who mixed with all kinds of people. Sometimes the kids talk about being salads. They want to be salads. They don't want to lose their identity, but they're still going to be a tomato, but they want to be blended in the salad with all the other folks in the salad, more so than a soup where they lose your sense of who you are,
Mm-hmm. What are some of the stigmas or challenges you faced from the community at large for the project, or has it just been supportive?
We don't have many. Not that I'm aware of. It could be that there...
I have a list right here, actually. No, I'm just kidding.
Sometimes in the schools, we'll have more female high school counselors. High school counselors, they apply to be counselors. They fill out a form and explain why they want to be counselors. And in some schools that are newer, it's harder to find counselors. In other schools, there's just, this massive amount of applications that come in and kids get turned away. Initially, we thought we would have adults, community members, be counselors to the family groups. And guess what? People have jobs and they just can't get away. We would get maybe 1 or 2 volunteers per camp. But somebody suggested high school kids, and that's been one of the best decisions because the middle school kids really look up to those high school kids. And we've had amazing high school kids to serve as counselors. One of the downsides is for the newer schools, sometimes high school, our male students sometimes will think, I don't want to do that. It's whatever, touchy-feely. one of the beautiful things about Clinton Massey's programs is as long as they're still not involved in the state championship and they can come, a lot of the football players come. And so you got the big, burly offensive linemen. They come to camp and they're modeling the idea of respecting one another and their gods to these middle school kids. And so it's always cool if we can get the Dennis Nances or the Marcus Nances, or these are some names from the past, kids who are the point guard for the basketball team or the quarterback for the football team to come to camp and be a counselor, because it's hard for kids to see it as being weak to be a male counselor. So sometimes we have a hard time getting male counselors in the newer schools. The schools that have been doing it for a while, we don't have any problem.
All right, Jimbo, this is the lightning round.
Lightning round, okay.
We're going to just bust these last questions out, the philosophical questions. Why is what you do important to our community? What keeps you passionate?
Seeing the smiles on the faces of the teachers and the kids. And it promotes a healthy community because the kids go out understanding the value of treating other people with respect.
We've already asked this before, but what's a quote or piece of wisdom that's helped guide you that you want to share with others?
Community is not produced, but is invoked and awakened. John O'Donohue wrote that.
What does real change mean to you? What would it look like to make a positive real change in Wilmington's community?
Well, if we could do more follow-up, and that's a legitimate criticism, if we could do more follow-up with kids after they've been to camp to keep promoting these ideas, and it would be even more powerful. The high school counselors get to come back over and over, and the impact on them is tremendous. So, or if we had an opportunity to be in businesses and work in some of these ideas with adults, it'd be great.
And finally, how can people get in touch with you or support Project Trust if they want to do that?
Probably the best way to reach me would be through my email address, which is jimbo45177@gmail.com. If they have questions or comments or want to support us. At the current time, if folks want to donate, which we would certainly encourage, they would donate to the Clinton County Ohio Foundation.org, or it's the Clinton County Foundation, but their website, they serve as our fiscal agent. And so they would donate to Clinton County Ohio Foundation.org, earmark the funds for Project Trust.
Very cool. Thanks for being on our podcast.
Yes,
thanks for very good to get to know you.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed listening to your podcast about Bruce Saunders. Shout outs to our board. They've been with us from almost the beginning. Mike Adams, who's the principal at East Clinton High School, is a member of the Project Trust Board. Laura Lynch, who's a teacher at East Clinton Middle School. Tyler Williams, who is a counselor at Wilmington High School. Jerry Early, who is a principal at Putman Elementary School in Blanchester. Myself, and Sheila Boland, who is our treasurer, and my wife, who is tremendous at what she does. And she may or may not have told me to say that when I left the house today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll see you around town.
Yeah, I hope to see you around town.
Well, that's it for our podcast today, folks. Hope you enjoyed our interview with Jim Boland with Project Trust. If you have any more questions for him, please feel free to reach out directly. If he'll talk to us two dorks, he'll certainly talk to you as well, because after all, we are a community of empowered individuals. So if people want to reach out to Real Change Wilmington, how would they do that?
You can contact us on our website at realchangewilmington.com, visit our Facebook and Instagram pages, or grab a free copy of our local newspaper at Kroger, Sam's Meats, and Fiesta Veracruz. We also currently send our newspaper direct mail to over 2,500 Wilmington residents, so if you want to help us cover our printing cost and advertise your local business, event, or job posting, please email us at advertise@realchangewilmington.com.
Very cool. With that, I'm your host, Dustin Pierce.
And I'm your co-host, Tiara Harris.
Keep it real, Wilmington.